In my mind, there are two pillars on which you build sports franchise, specifically a cricket franchise. One is your brand, the other is your fan base. I have the biggest brand behind me, 3 letters called SRK, and then there's Juhi. I said, I don't need a brand on the field. The world in which we are living right now with the pandemic and everything else. So we're taking all kinds of precautions to make sure that the health and safety of the team and the players is not compromised in any way. Andre Russell is the Michael Jordan of T20 cricket.
It's wonderful to have the company of the CEO and the MD of Kolkata Knight Riders and the CEO of Red Chillies Entertainment, Mr. Venky Mysore. Thank you so much for giving me company on this special episode of the RK Show. Lovely to have you with us. Before I just start asking you those questions, I was just going through a few things. And this quote from Shah Rukh way back in September 2010 struck me. He said, I feel that the time has come to take KKR franchise to the next level and work towards globalizing the sport and professionalizing the franchise. 3 things that stood out for me from that quote, ladies and gentlemen: next level, globalizing the sport, and professionalism. 3 things that really stood out, and 3 things that have probably stood out as far as KKR is concerned over the last 10 years. Mr. Venky Mysore, it's been 10 years. The time has flown by, isn't it, for you?
Amazing. Well, first of all, RK, thank you for inviting me and having me on your show. I've followed a lot of the episodes that you've done, and it's a pleasure to be on your show. Yes, I mean, the first reaction when you put it in those terms and say 10 years, I keep thinking, where has the time gone? And the thing that strikes me is that, the old saying that time flies when you're having fun. So that is absolutely something that comes to mind. And it has been nothing short of a lot of fun over the 10 years. And, many challenges as we have gone along. And, just to specifically comment on the points that you made, at the outset, I must say, SRK is a very generous man, and so even in his comments, and how he is effusive when he talks about the work that we have done as a team. So I think basically, just to take you back to my start, which was I call that a very happy accident. I don't think I was pursuing anything, nor were they necessarily searching for anything. But it was a very happy accident, and I think full credit should go to actually Jay Mehta, who's, as you know, Juhi's husband and very close friend. We have a very close connect through the YPO organization. And so it just happened one day. We were just talking about various things, and suddenly somewhere some thing about my modest cricketing background came up, and when that came into the picture, then one thing led to another, and next thing you know, here we are 10 years later. But I think the way I saw the business, and Shah Rukh had asked me, I said, how do you see it as an outsider? I didn't know him at all, and it was a very interesting experience for me to meet with him to start with, and start thinking through, or at least sharing with him my own observations. I didn't want to be a little too, presumptuous by talking about how I saw the business from the outside. But what I could make out was that with anything that he touches, I know that he's a very big picture man. And it's amazing how over the 10 years, the multiple interactions that I've had, and as my responsibilities have also grown, that anything I go in with an idea which I think is well curated, it's a big idea, and then suddenly a conversation with him makes that 10 times bigger. So that was kind of his outlook for KKR as well, and said that, this has to become really big, and, how do we do this, and how do we work this out? So what happens is, I think we complement each other really well, because he's such a big picture person, but with all these big pictures, as we all know, and from my previous life as well, in terms of having started and run different types of businesses, you need someone who can grab hold of it, carry the ball forward. So which is what I have attempted to do.
But in terms of the timing, Mr. Mysore, it was interesting to say the least, isn't it? Because you looked at the first three seasons: 2008, 14 games, 13 points at number 6 KKR; 2009, 14 games, 7 points at number 8 KKR; 2010, 14 games, 14 points at number 6 KKR. Depends on which way you look at things. Not the best of times for KKR as a franchisee. So what was your first thoughts? What were the first things that you had to set right? Because on one hand, you are going to talk about process, which eventually leads you to a victory. But on the other end, you've got people, fans, owners wanting you to win. So what are the things that you had to set right first up?
Well, obviously this was when I came in after 3 seasons, and to be perfectly honest, I was an outsider watching IPL with maybe a touch of cynicism as well, because I grew up as more of a traditional sports guy, and then here you're seeing T20 in its full flow, and it was all intriguing, and like most what shall I say, people who are all cynical at that time, maybe I was in that group too, to say, well, is this really cricket, all that type of stuff. But I never thought that I would have to really sit down and articulate what all of these things meant. But I did certainly notice, because I knew Jay, and I just felt a little close to the franchise in some respects, just because he was my friend. I was watching it through him. And I think what was obvious was that I used to always sit down and feel, I wonder how SRK and Juhi and others feel, because everything they've touched in their lives has turned into gold. And here they were. Unfortunately, Knight Riders as an organization this was kind of what they were experiencing. And it was also obvious that, he in particular was in the eye of the storm, so to say. Anything that was critical about the franchise was always somehow his fault. But that was okay. It's cricket, and as we know, you try to do the best you can. The team was fabulous. It was always it was always a bit of a mystery and a conundrum as to how, when you look at all the players, you shared the results in each of those years. But if you just quickly look at the roster there, these are some of the match winners and who continued to do brilliantly in IPL. But why something didn't come together? But it was just used to be a fleeting thought at that point. So the only thing I would say, when I came in, he asked me also. He said, so how do you see it? And I kind of shared with him and listened more than say anything, because I used to listen, and he used to spend hours, and he and Jay and Juhi and others who were closely involved used to spend hours explaining to me all these things. And it's very entertaining also with him, a lot of anecdotes about how this used to happen, how that happened, and all this, and his own emotion that he went through when this was happening. Obviously, the opening game, everyone knows exactly what happened. It was, one would see even today when you see some of those replays and see how happy he was and his whole entourage and everything. But I made one statement to him, and I said, obviously, you're all not happy with the results that came through in 3 years' time. Right? So if I'm trying to think through what is it that we will do now going forward, I said, there is a saying that is often repeated mostly in the business context. They say that one of the definitions of insanity is to do the same things over and over again and expect different results. So I said, because none of you have been happy with the result, I said, we have to do something differently. I don't know what that is, but we have to do something differently. So I said, using that as a little bit of a framework, let me just think through and come back and try and figure out from a cricket standpoint. The business perspective, to be perfectly honest, was not daunting at all from my perspective, because relatively speaking, it was a small business relative to, when I say relative to what I used to run and the complexity of those businesses. So this is easy business to understand and how to focus on. But from a cricket standpoint, I said, wow, the expectations are also high that I come into the picture right now and somehow we're going to do something very different. So I said, therefore, the one step that we took or I proposed was to say, basically, and that was the time when the big auction was going to happen. And there was also the conversations around retention and stuff like that. So I said, listen, I mean, I'm unattached to the whole team and the players. I've not even met anybody. I don't know them personally, names, whatnot. But what if we wipe the slate clean and start afresh? And sort of, it's a chance that we'll be taking, because in the process, there's some amazing names and talent that we have in the team. But what if we sort of start afresh? And therefore, using the saying and the statement of insanity that I mentioned, I said, this is something that we'll do, therefore, differently. And, it all started with that. And then, it has taken its own course a little bit. So that was probably the first thought and the first starting point as far as I was concerned.
Yeah, it's almost Zen-like when you mention that. Why don't we do this and let's see where we go, because we need to change. But I'm sure there should be a lot of emotions, because when we think Kolkata Knight Riders, obviously it is Kolkata. When we think Kolkata, a couple of things that spring to my mind. One is food. The second is the passion and the emotion that is associated with cricket. And then, of course, you've got Sourav Ganguly, because when you're talking about those decisions, you're talking about seriously big decisions. How difficult is it to stay emotionally unattached? I know you've managed big businesses, and therefore you're used to taking such decisions. But when it came to cricket, when it came to emotions, Kolkata, Sourav Ganguly, how big a decision was it to make?
See, I'll break that down into two parts. Personally, for me, it didn't seem like a big decision, only because I was unattached to it. And if I had been part of the organization for 3 years or even 1 year or 2 years, it would have been a tougher decision, because this is like somebody just completely coming in from the outside, which is what I was. And also literally outside, meaning, literally from the outside. But I think eventually I realized that for the organization and for the owners in particular, it was tough. Because it's a decision, it's an approach that I proposed as somebody who had been sort of given the mandate. I think I look back right now, whether that was the right decision or not. I basically said, listen, I don't know if it's the right thing to do or not. And we may fall flat on our face, but it's a different approach. So, are we all on board with this? And I tell you, I think if I were to attribute one of the many things that has contributed to the success of whatever we have had so far, whatever success we have had, is the fact that the owners have completely, Shah, Rukh, Juhi, have completely stood behind the decisions that I have proposed. I'm not a maverick Lone Ranger type who runs off and wants to do my own thing. But at the same time, in my entire career, I was used to being given the autonomy to operate and to also be accountable at the same time. So I used to report to boards, and so everyone has a boss. So my reporting relationship was with the board when I was CEO and when I was country head and whatnot of MetLife and Sun Life, respectively, for years running big businesses. But it could easily have been a micromanaged type of a situation, or second guessing the decision I've made, or to basically say, yeah, but yes, we made some of these announcements, but let's not do it. Would have been easy for them to say that, but they stood completely behind me, and therefore I think they took a lot of flack for that too, and heat. And as an organization, therefore, it was tougher. I think it was tougher for them, but to be perfectly honest, it was not that difficult for me to take that decision.
How does it work for people that are watching this? Because what people see is what comes on screen, which is the auction. But in terms of when you're retaining a player, for example, or letting go of a player, what's the kind of conversation, Mr. Mysore, that you normally have? Do you have a conversation at all? More so, say, for example, in this particular case, when you're talking about, say, Sourav Ganguly, who's picked up as the icon, the Kolkata connection, what's the kind of background that you have to everything that all of us see in the foreground?
Well, the cricketing discussions were sort of, and I was trying to, even today, what I do is, that was the biggest one even for me in 10 years, because that was the first time we were going completely with a clean slate. We built the entire squad at the auction table, literally. But subsequent auctions, we have retained players and we have. So therefore, in subsequent auctions, you almost say, okay, this is my core and I build around this core, and this is what KKR stands for, and this is the continuity in some shape or form that we have to give. And so how do we build a cast around this? But in 2011 auction, when we were sitting there, I basically said, listen, we are thinking of a fresh start. We are thinking of looking at it from a bit of a long-term standpoint. And so how do we build? There was no quote unquote a think tank there. It's a very small group of us who were basically sitting. It was very small. And we just were working through what that should be. And I think the direction that I was trying to give with all of these things was to basically say, okay, one direction was, this is all about, it's also about the business side to some extent. And I basically said, listen, this is all about Team KKR now. And Team KKR, rather than, because my business instincts said to me that unless I build the brand, the KKR brand, and unless I build a fan base around the franchise, it's going to be very difficult for me sooner or later. And because if it is much more associated with a player or a group of players, sooner or later, the nature of IPL is such that it's going to change, right? Just the dynamics of the auction, retention, all of those things. So therefore, how do you create the Team KKR concept? And then at the same time, basically say, okay, what are the brand of cricket that you want to play? What are the conditions under which we're going to play? And therefore, the whole thought process was more around saying, keep those names aside.
What did Gautam Gambhir bring to that side? Because, here's a Delhi boy captaining Kolkata Knight Riders to a couple of fabulous victories. What is Gautam Gambhir? What is it about Gautam Gambhir, and what did he bring to that side as a leader?
See, obviously, I didn't know Gautam at all before we picked him. And, again, there were a lot of dramatic moments in KKR's history, as far as I'm concerned. Because the first auction that I was going to, 2011, we had made our plans. But, with me, one of the things that I always drive is to make sure that we are not fixated on one plan. We always have plan A, plan B, plan C, etc. because of just the capricious nature of the auctions. You don't know what's going to happen. But I was myself quite nervous. I think we were very well prepared. But we were quite nervous because this was my first auction. And we were just sitting there. And the owners basically took a call at that point saying that this is your baby, your project. So therefore, you run it, your plan, you go and execute. We're not going to come to the auction. And that is something that has been the pattern with KKR ever since I've been involved. Jai and Juhi, sometimes they come and sit at the table, but doesn't mean that they get involved with making any decisions at the table. And for that matter, even SRK. We brief them completely. We have discussions and various things. They have their own ideas. And ultimately, they say, listen, it's your call. You guys have thought it through more than we can. So it's your call. So I was sitting there and I was hoping, and I was saying my prayers a little bit, and my heart was beating, certainly. And I see all the other most familiar faces of other teams and their ownerships, and they're all coming in and occupying their respective tables. And then I was saying to myself, this is like warm up, when you have a few knockdowns like batsmen like before they go to bat. I said, let 2-3 names come in the auction that we are not interested in. Let's see, let it warm up. Let's see what happens. Lo and behold, the first name in the 2011 auction, Gautam Gambhir, the very first name that came in. And it was like unbelievable. And we were quite determined, somewhere. Obviously, we had budgets and we had, what I call a circuit breaker pricing and whatnot in our strategy. But my instinct said that this would be the right thing to do. And so I was taking that call, although it had exceeded our circuit breaker, what we had anticipated and all the mock auctions that everybody does and all that, because the Kochi team was equally motivated. And so there was a dog fight for that. But then, the rest is kind of history, because then I got to know Gautam. I've connected with him right after that. I think he also will express, and he has already expressed several times, that he was most surprised when he heard that KKR had picked him, because he thought some other team was actually going to be picking him and all that. He said, KKR. Yes. And so I built an amazing, I have a great relationship with him, and we built a very strong relationship because I think he fitted in perfectly with what we were trying to accomplish as a franchise, which is about Team KKR. And it's not about an individual. It's not about superstars and whatnot. And that's his personality as well, as you can see. I mean, he's one of those, I put him down as somebody who is extremely intelligent, very smart, great instincts, and a terrific leader. And that leadership is something that manifests itself much more when he's on the field. I mean, it's not about making noise and various other things outside of it. So he was one of those understated, quiet people. In fact, I used to have conversations with him invariably. It used to be, we used to have a breakfast together or have a coffee together and just chat about things. Or sometimes we're sitting next to each other on a flight and just sort of, quietly having a chat. That was that off the field. But when he got on the field, he was, his intensity just changed. Somewhere that switch would go on, and his best instincts also came out as a leader and as a player. And I think that is the kind of personality that people just followed on the field. And he commanded that. He didn't have to make too much noise coming in. I mean, he was not one of those the big speech givers, because I remember in team meetings sitting in and various other types of things. And people used to ask him, coaches, Trevor Bayliss came in the very second year and used to say, Gautam, anything to say? And he'd say, not really. Let's just do this and do that. Just a man of very few words. So it was amazing. So he fit in really well with what we wanted to be as KKR. People used to ask me, funnily, just to say, oh, don't you want some big names, marketing wise, brand, this. Then I used to tell them, what are you talking about? I have the biggest brand behind me, 3 letters called SRK, and then there's Juhi. I said, I don't need a brand on the field. I need us to work as a team. And once they cross the ropes and they go out there, all that's expected of the team is that they give out the best effort. And I think under Gautam, we saw that he would bring the best out of people as a team, and we were out there and they would follow him. So it was a fantastic 7 years. And it was also something that I cherished that relationship, and even today have a great equation with him and his family, and I know how much of a family man he is, and his 2 girls, and he just absolutely adores them. So it's been a fantastic phase, and it'll always continue to be. It's not about just, okay, this is done and then we move on to something else. So those relationships are what you cherish.
Yeah, it's around that time that obviously KKR went beyond the Indian boundaries, isn't it? Around that 2014-15 a period when you decided that, look, I mean, yes, we've got KKR, we've got the IPL, but why don't we think global? Why don't we take it beyond the Indian shores? And therefore, you had the Trinbago Knight Riders eventually, isn't it? I mean, take us through that journey, because globalization, is that something that you consciously looked at, and how did you look upon that opportunity to spread your wings of brand KKR?
Definitely. See, this is where I think, my own business orientation and experience, because in my previous life, before I got involved with KKR, when I was in financial services, I spent 13 years in the US with MetLife, and then I became part of international operations. So my job was to actually go to various different markets and countries and start up the businesses there and move on to the next country. So much so that I was in Indonesia first, then I was in Hong Kong. I was on my way to Korea when suddenly India started happening. So I came to India to set up the business. So that orientation was definitely there. Coupled that with the fact that when I saw the business of IPL, I realized that, when you build a franchise, I keep it very simple. In my mind, there are 2 pillars on which you build a sports franchise, specifically a cricket franchise. One is your brand, the other is your fan base. So when you look at these 2 pillars on which you build a franchise, you realize that all of these 2 things are the contributors for all revenue. I mean, it touches various things of the businesses. So anything that we do, even today when I have team meetings, I say, how is this impacting our brand? How is this impacting our fan base? Right? And so then you realize, when the context of IPL, that after all, it is a 2-month tournament. Yes, there's a build up to it, maybe a month. And then there is a wind down to it, which happens very quickly after the final is over. Then somehow everyone moves on to their different things. So the question in my mind was, so how do I keep my brand alive the rest of the year? And how do I keep building my fan base and engaging them for the rest of the year when IPL is not happening? That was always the biggest challenge. And even today, the brands who associate with us, they have a very similar type of challenge. So people used to say, oh, the IPL season could get expanded. There could be a second season of IPL. All this talk was going on. And I have a practical side to me which says that, listen, if it happens, let's see. Let's not hope for it, because there's an old saying that hope is not a strategy. So I said, we don't want to just fall back on hope. So my thought was, how do I keep my brand alive? How do I keep my fan base building? And my idea was at that time, and there was a vision document early in my association with KKR that I had shared with Shah, Rukh and Juhi, in saying that if we can go out and become part of leagues and ideally own assets around the world, similar to the globalization that I was talking about in my with the experience that I'd had of it, and basically say that, okay, if there are 3, 4, 5 assets that we own, and timing wise it works out in a way where you go from IPL to something else to something else to something else, and then now this is one way in which you keep your brand alive around the year. And ideally, if it is based on a mother brand, which is Knight Riders. That was my wish list, right? And actually, we had conversations, to be honest, Big Bash came to us early when they were setting up. And they didn't have really, they had expansion teams in Sydney and Melbourne, and we were offered those teams. But what they had in mind in terms of how the role that they wanted us to play was more at that point like an investor role, a passive investor. I said, that doesn't make sense. We're not going to go
give me a bit more on that. Give me a bit more on that. What did you mean by that? Because what's the difference between...
Yeah. So, for example, you would own, say, 49% of a franchise, and you would put in the money that is required for that ownership. But could you name the team Sydney Knight Riders, for example? No. Could I have my purple and gold colors there? No. Could I manage the league, manage the franchise the way we are used to here? No. So it is going to be called something else, but you are a 49% owner. And so somewhere somebody had to say, oh, by the way, did you know that the Knight Rider group also owns this? I said, that doesn't lend to the business strategy. It may be okay from a return on investment standpoint, but it didn't make any sense. So we passed on that at that point. And they went with a completely different model, and they still have stayed that way. But then what happened was CPL came to us. And basically, at the time, CPL was launching in 2000. I think we went in the third year, so 2013.
15, you went in 15.
Yeah, we went in 15.
Yeah, 15.
But CPL was launched in 2013. So they came to us before the launch. And there was hardly any time. Invariably, that's how these things work. That the league launch date has been set up, and 24 hours before that, you're sitting with somebody and having a conversation. I'm exaggerating, but it was almost like that. I said, listen, we just don't have the time to get organized for this. And it didn't seem like the right type of thing. The people who were involved at that stage, the conversation didn't go the way we wanted to, so we passed on that. But after CPL conducted the league for 2 years, they came on the third year and basically said, we would really like for... So what has happened is that I think by then we had established ourselves to a point where Knight Riders had become a very strong established brand in India. Our winning track record, we had won 2 championships by that time, and then we were the first business perhaps to become profitable. And some of the words you used to describe us as professional, all those types of things had come into play. And so they said, we really would like, because people realize even today, I think that's something that we're very proud of, is that when they think of Knight Riders, they realize that us becoming part of any league, we bring a lot of value to that, and it enhances it.
Your thoughts ahead of this particular season of the IPL? We've always seen a brand of cricket as far as KKR is concerned. With Gautam Gambhir, we saw what was with Dinesh Karthik. There's a few changes as far as the side is concerned. What are your expectations? What do you see for KKR from Dinesh Karthik and his men?
Well, I think in many ways, DK was a very nice, seamless transition from a Gautam to a DK, because personality-wise, if Gautam was understated, DK is even more understated. So the culture of the team, there's continuity to that. In 2018, we started that journey. But one of the things that we did was it gave us an opportunity in the auction to invest in a lot of youngsters. I mean, so really excited about it. When you look at a KKR team, unfortunately, over the last 2 years, we've had a couple of really promising youngsters who have been faced with the injury type of issues. So the cricket-loving public at large have not had the chance to for them to showcase. So knock on wood, fingers crossed that everyone will be fit and that we'll be able to showcase the entire strength of what we had built. So when you look up front, when you look at someone like a Shubman Gill, I mean, he's just a joy and a pleasure to watch. We've had the luxury of seeing him in action, not only in games, but in net sessions, on practice games. And everyone says this, and he's just an absolute special talent. I think that Shrana has been brilliant for us. I mean, what he does and how he has become so attached to the franchise is absolutely brilliant. I mean, DK himself, he never wants to take too much credit, and so you can't say enough of the kind of role that he plays as a batsman coming in, and of course as a leader. He is this has been probably a huge challenge which he has really stood up to very well. Then of course you have the two stars there. You have the Andre Russell and you have Sunil Narine. I mean, a lot of people keep thinking about the Andre Russell as the best all-rounder, which he is. He is our coach. I borrowed a line from him recently when he said that Andre Russell is the Michael Jordan of T20 cricket. But at the same time, you look at Sunil Narayan's stats, a lot of people may be pleasantly surprised as to how he's not that far behind in terms of his all-round capabilities and how he has contributed to KKR and what he does with the bat. We know what he does with the ball. So those two have been absolutely brilliant. So from that perspective, when you look at us adding a Pat Cummins to our lineup, adding a Owen Morgan, and both of them were ex-KKR players. So that's the beauty about it. And a young, talent like Tom Banton coming into the picture there. And then when you look at some of our bowlers, of course, Kuldeep Yadav, we think of him as a veteran right now. I mean, when we picked him in 2014, from the under 19. So exactly. So we've had a little bit of a pattern of picking youngsters and backing them, and they've gone on to play for the country, which is great. Gives us great joy. You look at bowlers like Prasidh Krishna, who we picked him as a replacement in 2018, and he's come leaps and bounds. Amazing talent. Sandeep Warrior, all India A type of players. And then you look at some of the youngsters who have not been showcased. I mean, Shivam Mavi has not had much of an opportunity because of injuries again. But the one guy that we're totally looking forward to seeing in action is Kamlesh Nagarkoti. He's an unbelievable young kid, fantastic kid. He's just like, I literally feel like he's one of my kids when I talk to him. He's that age, and he sort of has the same emotion towards me as well, I think. But people who see him in action, I mean, the way he bowls, the pace at which he bowls, and he can really bat. But most importantly, people say Rahul Dravid had told me once that he's one of the best fielders going around in India, and that he would compete with the likes of Jadeja, which is a big statement coming from someone like Rahul Dravid. So we couldn't be more excited to see him in action. So we've got this. So the team is very exciting for us, and I think they all nicely fit in, which is something that we see. I think the other exciting part of it is that we have a new head coach in Brendan McCullum. It's a very exciting prospect for us. There is a very strong touch of nervousness as well, just given the world in which we are living right now with the pandemic and everything else. So we're taking all kinds of precautions to make sure that the health and safety of the team and the players is not compromised in any way. So fingers crossed, knock on wood on that. When people talk about SOPs and they talk about the precautions that we need to take, I said, let's err on the side of conservatism because this is most important. And so everyone is chomping at the bits, ready to go. So let's hope that, I don't want to say too much right now, but in 2014, we started our campaign in UAE. and it was a successful year for us. So let's hope that Abu Dhabi brings us the same type of. It was a lucky charm last time around. Let's hope that's the case.
Thank you so much, Mr. Venky Mysore. Wonderful. Just a range of subjects from the back end to the front end to everything that you spoke about KKR and beyond. Appreciate your company and joining me right here on the RK Show. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.